Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 189 of the Citrix Session. I'm your host, Bill Sutton, the director of Modern Workspace at XenTegra. I have a couple of other folks from XenTegra with me today. There are solution architects on the Modern Workspace team. I'll answer them in order that I see their pictures. So I'll start with Stuart Donaldson. Stuart is on our team as a solutions architect. You want to just quickly introduce yourself, say hello, Stuart, so they know your voice.
Oh, am I muted? No, I'm not muted. It would have made sense to do that. Yeah, Stu Donaldson. I'm on the Enterprise Workspace team, and happy to be here today.
Great, Stu. Thanks. And also, we have with us Randy Price, who's a longtime SA with XenTegra. Randy, you want to say hello?
Yeah. Hey, guys. It's great to be here.
Yep. Great to have you. It's been a while, guys. I've like 3 or 4 weeks, I think, we've been kind of off the grid because of various one or more of us being unavailable. This might be the last one this year. I don't know. We might do one next week. I don't know. But then once we get into Christmas week and New Year's week, I'm sure we won't do anything. Those will be canceled because nobody will be here. So happy to be back today. Today we're going to cover a Citrix blog article, and I think I have shared. Yes, it is entitled "One Identity, Every App Now Inside Citrix Sessions." That's one identity, every app now inside Citrix Sessions. It's written by Sean Bass, who is a senior exec at Citrix over the desktop group, I believe. His title has changed recently, but he's a really long time EUC person, and has been at Citrix for a couple of years now, I believe. So overall, this article is really dealing with password simplicity. Over the years, various industry folks have talked about we need to get to passwordless. We need to get to passwordless. Really hasn't been much progress made in that regard for a number of reasons, and not the least of which is the dependence on traditional on-premises Active Directory, which of course was, I guess, Randy, that goes back to the NT days, probably is where it first came out, or maybe it was Windows 2000 Server. I'm not sure which was first with Active Directory. It might have been Windows 2000 Server.
Windows 2000, yeah.
Yeah, nevertheless, the Active Directory environment, and that goes back, I mean, if you figure Windows 2000 was released in the year 2000, that's 25 years worth of legacy development that we're still living with. Of course, it's always been a very solid authentication platform, but as the industry has moved to more modern authentication with things like Microsoft Entra ID and other third-party IDP or IDP providers, like, for example, Okta is another example of an IDP. It's complicated things a little bit. It's made life easier for users in some ways, but where we're dealing with part of the environment is running on AD and part of the environment is running with Microsoft Entra ID, things get a little messy, to be kind, and to enable that kind of seamless access from your endpoint all the way into a Citrix virtual app or Citrix virtual desktop. And that's really where the modern authentication platforms broke down. So one of the ways of handling or addressing that, where you're dealing with on-premises Active Directory and SAML federated authentication or Microsoft Entra ID or Okta for that matter, you've had to stand up FAS. You want to talk a little bit about federated authentication services, Randy, and what that does and what it brings to bear for the end user and the administrator?
Sure. So, to your point, right, if I'm using some external IDP and attempting to log into my Citrix VDA, right, through that session, traditionally, on-prem deployments, like you mentioned before, they don't know how to interpret those, SAML authentication, right? So FAS is there to present a certificate, user-based certificate at user login. That is a separate service that you have to deploy within the environment. It does require certificate services, right? And essentially at login time, what happens is it'll generate a user certificate and present that user certificate so you can have that seamless sign-in versus the user being prompted again, right? Because again, those workloads not being able to interpret, SAML-based authentication. So, that's
right, and
that's at a high level, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that, of course, that involves the deployment of at least two FAS servers for high availability if you're talking a small environment, as well as a Microsoft. Well, I don't think it's limited to Microsoft anymore, but in the early FAS days, it was Microsoft Certificate Services or Microsoft PKI infrastructure. You had to have CA root servers and intermediate servers. I guess you didn't have to have intermediate. Maybe you did. That FAS would reach out to and request the short-lived certificates for, and then use that to authenticate the user like a smart card, right?
Right, and you would typically deploy those, right? If you're using Citrix DAS, you would need FAS servers for each resource location as well. So.
Yes, good point. Very good point.
To your point there, I mean, FAS introduced a workaround to the problem, but it also adds to the idea of technical debt. I mean, we're just accruing it over and over and over again, whether it's the requirements and complexity. It's the fact that FAS is now a very, very serious target for possible exploitation. And then, sometimes it just didn't generate the certificate that it was supposed to. It just didn't work. So in my experience, it's been very reliable, but there is a measure of technical debt that we're accruing every time we add something like this in.
Yeah, and part of that technical debt is driven, like I said, by the need for Kerberos when you're dealing with Active Directory, and the fact that most of these modern authentication platforms don't leverage that, to my knowledge. So Citrix, in conjunction with Microsoft, decided it was time to close the gap between modern authentication and the concept of FAS and other elements to provide workarounds. So they worked together to create Microsoft Entra ID SSO. So Microsoft Entra ID SSO into the Citrix Session. So what this means to administrators and end users is, first of all, your VDAs, your workloads have to be Entra ID or Entra Hybrid ID joined. They also have to be Windows 11 workloads, no server workloads at this point. If you want server workloads, you're still going to have to leverage something like FAS to enable SSO. And then you've got to configure your Entra ID environment such that it knows to talk to through the Citrix provider in order to get the types of authentication that are needed to enable access to the VDAs or the workloads. So the idea here is the user logs in from a laptop using Entra ID, just like they do every day. I do it every day. They authenticate and they log in, and then they launch a published app, or they launch their desktop, their published virtual desktop through the Workspace app. Today, the Workspace app is it's the recommended method of accessing for this. There is a way you can get there via the web, but you have to have a plugin. It's the Microsoft SSO plugin has to be installed in the browser in order for this to work all the way through. So again, I'll back up. They need to be Entra ID joined, needs to be Windows 11. And I'm talking about the virtual desktops or the virtual apps. Obviously, the workstation needs to be Entra ID joined or hybrid joined. So the point is, you log in with your Entra ID credential to the laptop. When you launch your Citrix session, it passes that credential all the way through to into the Citrix session, and you're logged in seamlessly without having to be without being prompted for any additional authentication or any additional IDs. No second MFA. Your all of that is preserved through the connection to the Citrix environment. There is no FAS in this architecture, as long as you follow the prerequisites and everything. But one key thing about this that it does preserve, that FAS, you might say to yourself, well, FAS could do this. So what does this bring me that FAS doesn't? And what it brings you is something called the primary refresh token, or the PRT, which was a relatively new part of the Entra ID framework. And essentially what that allows you to do is take that authentication token, and I'm probably technically saying this wrong, so I'll apologize. If somebody wants to call me out, that's fine. But essentially the PRT details get passed into the virtual desktop session where they can be used for authentication of things like Microsoft 365 apps, OneDrive, all of that stuff that you would otherwise likely be required to authenticate to directly. Am I saying that right, Randy and Stu?
Yes. Yeah.
More or less.
Yeah. More or less. That's correct. Yep.
Yeah. So that's what this is really boils down to is you don't have to replicate policies or manage different identity layers The user authenticates once, and their security posture stays with them. No more double MFA, things of that nature. And you get one sign on in end to end. You're not adding anything. There is no federation or no FAS, Federated Authentication Services. So why this really matters is, again, you get one identity source across your local machine, the cloud, your virtual desktop. It eliminates the need for duplicate identity providers or plugins, SSO type plugins. It preserves the authentication information to enable the passing of the data that's needed for the PRT. You get full conditional access capabilities, both at the endpoint and inside the Citrix session. And it's a move to get us to passwordless. I read a couple of articles relative to this that indicated that some passwordless authentication may work for this either now or in the future, like Hello for Business. I think there are still some development to be done there, as well as FIDO2 authentication, using something like a YubiKey. Those things are coming. Today, if you enter a username and password via Entra and then you're prompted for your MFA, you're going to get in all the way through. So we're 18 minutes in, guys, and that's really the blog article. But I wanted to get your thoughts. Anything you might want to add to what we've talked about? Anything I missed or left out or was wrong about?
No.
Yeah, go ahead, Stu. I'll let you go first.
This is another one of those the juice worth the squeeze kind of questions right now, because there is a operational cost for moving in this direction, right? We still, if we get seamless SSO, we get those zero trust security kind of methodologies. We get the architectural simplification without needing FAS and whatnot, but we're forced to upgrade to a version of Windows 11 that supports it. So your organization better be ready for 24H2 and that new VDA 2507. Beyond that, we have to make sure that our legacy apps are ready to work in this realm. So, and then correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I believe auto client reconnect is also lost in this process because
it is. Session. That's a good point. Session reliability remains, but auto client reconnect, you're right, is gone.
And that even goes towards if somebody locks the session, right? I mean, at that point, you need something like a disconnect on log off, or you're going to have a lot of confused people who they don't even have the option to put a password in. They don't know it, right? So, yeah,
it does say here auto client reconnect is not supported when Entra ID single ID session. The feature is automatically disabled when you use this method. Session reliability is still available for automatic reconnection in case you have like a network disruption. Mm-hmm. And to your point, Stu, I would encourage listeners to do a Google search for Entra ID single sign-on with Citrix. It'll take you to the documentation, and there's a lot of things in here that go over some of the considerations to have when you're deploying this, as well as a detailed walkthrough of how to configure it. And it's not for the faint of heart. It's a good solution, but it's not for the faint of heart at this point. There's a lot of scripting that needs to be done to get things. And I'm sure you can do some of the scripting through the GUI, but it looks like they've mostly focused on PowerShell scripting to get the configuration put in place. Randy, were you going to say some things?
No, I think you guys hit it on the head, right? So, and the biggest thing, like you mentioned before, we start talking around how we handle this, traditionally FAS versus, this method. It really comes down to, those VDAs. Are they AD domain join? Are they Entra ID domain join? So, if it's AD domain join, this is not going to apply to you. If you're using Storefront, right, this is not going to apply to you. This is really, truly just Citrix DAS using Citrix Workspace. And again, Workspace app is a requirement. They list here as well. They actually mention in one of their known issues that if you enable this and you have users that use both Citrix Workspace app and the web browser, that logging in through the web browser, they could see a 30-second delay, right, during the authentication piece. Okay. Yeah, so because it's going to attempt first, and so there's going to be a 30-second delay. So that's one thing to call out, because we all think about login times. How does that affect the end users? So if your users are using a mixed method of how they're accessing their apps or desktops, just be aware of that if all users aren't using Citrix Workspace app, they could incur that 30-second delay. So that's something to be aware of as well.
Very good point. Yep, I must have missed that or not
Yeah,
seen
it's down
that.
on the bottom. If you go scroll down under known issues, they list a couple of things just to be aware of.
Okay.
I like to typically look through that. It's towards the bottom of this article. Yeah, scroll up a little bit,
Yeah.
you'll see it. Keep going up a little
Oh,
bit.
there it is.
There
Yep.
it is. So just something to be considerate of as well, especially like I said, login times seem to be the bane of every Citrix admin, right? Trying to decrease those. So we don't want to do anything necessarily to increase those without understanding that. So
Yeah, and there's a couple of tables at the beginning of the. I'll make sure that I post a link to this in the show notes so listeners can get directly to it. But there's a couple of tables in here that deal with what's supported, and like you said, Randy, it's pretty much DAS and Workspace, and obviously the gateway service and NetScaler, but CVAT on-prem is not.
right. You notice
it's not to say that it won't be at some point, but it's not now.
Right. And even on the supported identity providers, if you notice, adaptive authentication is not supported, right? So
yes,
that's something to be aware of as well. And, probably understand the reason behind that, but still, there's something to be aware of. So.
And an important point as well is this is, even though I mentioned Okta before, this is only Entra ID SSO with Citrix, only Entra. That's largely because Microsoft and Citrix worked together to get this to the point where they could configure it to work the way described. I expect this is the first release of this. I expect we'll see this evolve over time like we do with all things like this, but this is a really good start. And for those customers that are really solidly in the Entra ID camp, and they're using Workspace app with Windows 11, this could be a good solution for them to kind of reduce some of the friction of the login experience for their users.
Yep. Agreed.
All right. Well, that's all we had. That's all we had for today. Any other any final thoughts, guys, you want to convey before we adjourn?
No, I'm good.
Good.
Okay. Well, I'll just say that what I've always said whenever we run into new features like this, that Citrix continues to iterate. They're not sitting back on their laurels. They are continuing to innovate in their products and add new features and functionality to respond to user requests. So it's just another example of that, which is obviously a good thing to keep the technology moving forward. All right, guys. Thank you all for joining today. Hopefully we'll see you again next week.
Take care.
Thank you, guys.